I'm Dane Rose, and in this video, I'm neither going to recommend or not recommend that you work with Ann Watts in a therapeutic or relational capacity. I've received both benefit and, in the end, more harm than benefit in my own relationship with Ann Watts. And so I think whether or not you achieve only benefit or only harm or a little bit of both will somewhat depend on the circumstance and the nature of the relationship. The benefit that I received from Ann was bolstering some of the male bashing that I've received as a sensitive male, growing up. There's a fair amount of hostile stereotypes towards men that are put out generically, meaning they're not broken down male by male. And any man in the general culture is going to be hit psychically, energetically, with a certain amount of that barrage. And Ann is among, I've worked with roughly 40 practitioners. And I would say that, Ann's strength is that she's not anti-male in the way that some female therapists are, but also in the way that some of the larger cultural messages are, quite strongly anti-male. Men are like this, men do that, that kind of thing. So that bit was useful in my, various couples dynamics. I brought 5 lovers into couples therapy with Ann Watts, and I would say that the beneficial aspect was I felt that, Ann understood my experience, my point of view, and was not anti-male. And Ann is also, like many people, but has some extraordinary qualities. She's a very good nuanced listener, which is good if you're trying to integrate. I integrate by talking. And so the fact that Ann is a good listener and patient with details is a definite strength. Now, in my kind of ongoing couples and personal therapy with Ann, I would say that the single biggest problem lies in a very deep blind spot that is present for a lot of therapists and relationship counselors. And it's the area of trauma and PTSD. So I come from a family of high trauma and came into my various lover relationships and therapeutic relationships, including with Ann, with complex PTSD and symptoms of complex PTSD. And unfortunately, Ann lacked the ability to notice or inquire about that. And more damagingly, lacked the ability to notice that she wasn't noticing. Now, the reason that's more damaging is if somebody says, it looks like you're, have a limp, but I don't deal with limps, I'm not going to help you with the limp. What you need to do is go see someone that fixes limps, a chiropractor or something like that. That's a very important level of awareness, the awareness that this is going on and I don't deal with it. Now, like many therapists, Ann is ill-equipped to notice the symptoms of fight, flight, and freeze that are key to, as well as dissociation, that are key to understanding that you're in traumatic terrain. Now, as a result, the biggest underlying issue in all of my relationships did not get addressed because Anne lacked not only the competency to address it, but the competency to know that she lacked the competency to address it and refer me to somebody else. And so, I experienced, after I think 5 couple dynamics with Anne, I just stopped going. Now, there were 2 things that I wanted. Just one. What I wanted, because I talked a lot, and I knew there was a pattern to see. I knew that if I talked enough, the pattern would be revealed. And I knew there was a pattern to see. And I didn't know what to do with the pattern, right? If I did, I would not drive out of my way, 45 minutes each way, and go pay someone hundreds of dollars if I already knew what I needed to do. Now, my frustration that kind of grew over time was that Anne never said, this is what's going on and here's what you need to do. And I knew there was something going on, and I knew I needed to do something about it, but I didn't come away any clearer about what that was or what to do about it. So, when you're hitting a brick wall, and you're hitting a brick wall, you want to know what to do to stop hitting a brick wall. Now, my choice was to either learn to understand and deal with trauma and PTSD, or not to be in relationships. However, as someone whose loudest symptoms were chronic isolation, shame, loneliness, and dissociation, I didn't want to have nothing to do with relationships. I'd had enough of that, right? The dissociation technique. So what I needed to do was deal with complex PTSD and have a language to communicate that with my partners, and know how to work with it. So that was something I didn't receive. So what I most needed didn't come up, and didn't come up that it didn't come up, and I didn't know it, and Anne didn't know that she didn't know it. And so it was a circular and somewhat painful, frustrating phenomena that echoes the circular and painful, frustrating phenomena of millions of people in therapy with trauma-illiterate therapists. I say that with some confidence because it was a stranger in a cafe who introduced me to Peter Levine and healing trauma, which within 10 minutes of a stranger, ringing a bell, I see. That sounds familiar. I need to know about that. Within 10 minutes of a stranger recommending this book, I had downloaded it on Audible, and within 10 hours of a random stranger at a health food store recommending a book on trauma, I had listened to it and was already doing the techniques. The sad point is, in the later relationships with Anne Watts and her entire team of the Human Awareness Institute facilitators had already escalated complex PTSD into full-on PTSD with the help of their colleague Peter Sandhill before I knew what PTSD was or how to respond to it. And therefore, the higher and higher escalating levels of pain and trauma that I was experiencing was also traumatic because it was unknown. I had no idea what landscape I was in, thanks to the sustained ignorance of all of the 4 Human Awareness Institute facilitators that I hired, the one Human Awareness Institute facilitator who repeatedly sexually abused me over a decade, and all of the other kind of healers and counselors and coaches and stuff, none of whom mentioned trauma either. So, I went from low-grade complex PTSD to high-grade PTSD with no idea of the vocabulary or the paradigm or what to do about it, which made it terrifying to deal with. Now, of the Human Awareness Institute facilitators, Ann Watts is doing better than most, meaning, her head of the organization, when I recommended he read the book, he said, it's not our concern. We just sexually abuse and traumatize people. Trauma is not our focus, to learn about and, how to heal. Anne actually started reading the book immediately. And so, you have varying levels of competence, but certainly resistance to knowing what you don't know that you don't know is about the worst. And there are a good number of therapists who actively fight knowing and understanding what they don't know. And that's pretty terrifying. And that's partly why I'm neither going to dissuade you or persuade you to work or not work with Anne, because she may be well above average in a number of areas, and yet she may also, as she did with me, participate in the causing of more harm than any other person in my adult life, or any other people along with, her group at High. So, so some things better than average, but still terrible in certain areas. You have to make an informed decision. So I felt, I felt welcome and seen in areas. And, Anne is a wonderful person to talk to. And I felt supported, not ganged up on as I brought relationships. Now, one of my better relationships would have been quite a good relationship had the two of us been able to talk about trauma on her side and trauma on my side. And I regret that relationship ending as it did. And I pointed out what I was critical about of the woman to Anne, and she was, supportive of not, engaging with that woman. And that was it was probably the best thing that could have been done in a trauma illiterate room. However, as soon as the language of trauma was introduced, that was, among the better people in my life in terms of many other areas to connect with. And so I regret being trauma illiterate, at the time that I met and would have otherwise continued to build a healthy relationship, with Christy Deans was the woman's name. That's, I would say that a competent traumatic therapist would have helped navigate an otherwise good relationship. So, that is a definite regret. Now, in terms of protocol, a good therapist reveals what they're good at and not good at. Anne's kind of blanket, I'm here to help you, is not useful in that way. A good therapist begins with an intake form that looks at all kinds of things that no therapist has ever asked me in my entire life. Family history dynamics, patterns in key relationships, understanding the various traumatic levels, looking at adverse childhood experience ACE scores, looking at the primary area that's not working in a relationship and how to make it work, and asking data points so that the therapist is able to express and summarize patterns that was there in the data, but you didn't necessarily know was there in the data. And so that's starting off seeing clearly before you begin to decide what to do with what you're seeing is very important. That never happened. So that's a lapse. That's and there's all kinds of areas where that's important, but in any relational counseling area, you have got to understand the core patterns and dynamics and messages, as well as many of the beliefs. And it's very good therapy to give the client a workout. Read this book. Tell me what you think about this. Fill out this questionnaire. Do these tests, right? Now, the model for therapy in many ways is passive. I'm just going to sit there. You'll direct the session. You'll say what you want to say. I'll sit there and hear what you have to say, right? And I did ask Anne a few times, what do you think about here? What should I do here? But mostly where I was coming from in the session was at her institute, the Human Awareness Institute. There's a tremendous focus on asking for your 100%. So when I was looking at what I wanted in a female partner, I was asking, what is my 100% for a female partner? And unfortunately, nobody was what I wanted in my 100% as a partner. And, Anne just verified that, that person is not your 100%, nor is that person. So, Anne, do you know any people who? No, I don't know anyone. But none of those people are your 100%. And so I said, well, what do I do? She said, it's tough, right? So, but this is starting, off of, I think, the wrong foot. When I got married, I didn't ask if my wife was my 100%. I asked if I could be useful and could be my wife's 100%. Could I be her 100%? And what would I have to do and say to be that? Now that led to a relationship, right? That has had high growth and various things, but it's the exact opposite of, the Human Awareness Institute teaching. So, and I do think that in this culture, if one set out to pick a reasonably decent person and then ask oneself and ask them, what is your 100%? Number one. And number two, am I capable and willing to provide that? And number three, let's give it a go. I will be your 100%. I think that might, starting with abundance, rather than everyone looking for their 100% and nobody trying to be 100% for anyone, creates a scarcity mentality because, I never have ever met my 100%. But until I made the effort to be somebody else's 100%, my wife hadn't met her 100% either and wouldn't have met me if I had just looked at her and looked at my checklist and, you're not my 100% there. In fact, when I met my wife, I was clear I was not meeting her to date her because I was clear from her first email that she was not my 100%. Because my 100% was someone who could write, and she couldn't, And so I immediately said, this is not my 100%. So I'm not going to meet this woman as a dating person. But I had an intuition. I had an intuition that transcended my dogma of pursuing the 100%. my intuition was to meet this woman. I said, what am I doing meeting this woman? Meet this woman. Why? And I racked my brain. I said, this woman is so far from my 100%. It's not even worth meeting her as a dating partner. And then I thought, well, maybe I could be useful to her. And I thought, okay, knowing that this is not my 100%, that this woman does not have what I want, how would I feel if I met this woman with the sole purpose of being useful to her? And I thought, well, as long as I'm clear that that's what I'm doing, and I'm useful, then that'll work. So, okay, so we met. I asked her what was going on in her life, what her problems were. She told me a list of 5 problems. I said, here's how you solve this one. 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 I said, if you do those things and you want to talk more and you tell me how it worked out, feel free to write me. And I had no expectation I'd ever see her again, because in America, nobody follows advice. And so, an American would have done nothing with any of that. And that would have been the last I've heard of them. But she was a Filipina, and she went off. She did all those things, solved the problems, enjoyed her problems solving, and wrote to me. And then she read my book. And so I thought, wow, let's just see how useful I can be. And that was, the starting dynamic. But, this was breaking the ethos of asking for my 100%. Now, Ann Watts trained Peter Sandhill as a fellow high facilitator. And Ann Watts recommended Peter Sandhill without caveat as a high facilitator to also help with all kinds of wonderful things, right? There wasn't boundary. Now, Ann also taught many of my workshops at High. And why? Well, one of the reasons, I liked Ann, and I felt Ann saw and understood me more than some of her peers. So that was good. Now, High professes, and at the time professed to be committed to a world where everyone wins. Now, they obviously weren't that committed, since people are losing all the time, and High is not doing all that much about it. But that was the statement. We're committed to a world where everyone wins. There's a number of opportunities to increase winning in a workshop setting. You can teach people about trauma. You can give them definitions of healthy sex and addiction. You can give people definitions about love and abuse. You can talk about traumatic histories. You can talk about patterns you're replaying in relationships and patterns you don't want. And you can also reveal what you're good at and what you're not good at. So, Ann is part of a group of people that chose, not to do a safe psychological history prior to workshops. That's a mistake, given the amount of traumatic terrain people are in. They do not discuss the definition of love, though they profess to teach love. Instead, they do something more dangerous. They teach whatever they teach, whether it works or not, whether it harms people or not, but they call it love. And they do that by saying, this is the room of love. We love you. So we haven't defined what love is, but a lot of things are going to go on in this room. And whatever they are, this being the room of love, that's love, right? Well, this is unfortunately too close to the parental message. I'm hitting you because I love you. I'm doing this. And, Ann and her facilitators add to the confusion in level 5 and level 7 by deliberately doing the opposite of what you want. They say, would you like to join a group over here? And you say, yes, I'd like to. And they say, okay, fine, then do what you don't want to do. because we're exploring love. Go do what you don't want to do. Isn't that interesting? And they don't actually define love either. They're just communicating that love is cross-wired. You know, they're saying that if you want to do this, then we're going to make you do that because this is the room of love, right? So it's pretty sick, particularly for people in abuse dynamics who have experienced being violated, having their choices dishonored because people loved them. It's a mess. Maybe my parents were right. I didn't want to be hit, but they loved me, so they hit me, right? They said, do you want this? And I said, yes. And then they shouted at me, right? And then did the opposite. So, you know, what's the difference? Well, it's level 7. It's level, you know, and these are the advanced workshops. In the simple workshops, we respect your choice. We honor your boundaries. But in the advanced workshops, if you really want to be advanced, then you have to enter the world where you say you want to go right, and then we'll make you go left. Now, of course, you could still go right, but then you're not getting the full experience of cross-wired love, right? So I hated level 5 and 7 and just didn't do it. But what about people who need approval, right? That are abused and they're trying to get good enough, and so they want to do it right, and they want mom and dad to look, you know, they all want to do good at the upper levels, right? I don't want to be at the lower levels. You know, I want the upper levels, right? So it's, you know, that's not very good. Now, I was lovers with a number of highly traumatized females that I met at Human Awareness Institute workshops. And I did everything that I was told, which is basically a safe sex conversation physically. There's no psychological safe sex conversation. Why? Heart and mind doesn't matter in a loving relationship. Trauma doesn't matter. Abuse patterns, they don't matter. All that matters is when were you last tested for AIDS and this. So, you know, chauvinistically, the physical, external, let's have sex and not get a disease, that was covered. But the message, because this is the room of love, was that if the psychological conversation didn't take place, that didn't matter, and that was still love. But it's not very loving. If someone's been raped repeatedly and dissociates from their body every time you have intercourse, it's not very loving to say, I'm attracted to you, I'd like to have sex with you, can we have a safe sex conversation? Now, they may not know how to love themselves. They don't. This culture and Hyde does not teach that. It doesn't even teach what the definition of love is. But they want to be liked, of course. They want love and belonging, and if that's the cool thing to do, they may say, sure, I'd like to have sex with you. Because they don't know how to love themselves and say, no, let's talk about this first. But I don't know how to love them either. I don't know how to say, could we talk about, you know, your sexual abuse history? What makes you feel loved and what makes you feel unloved? What's your love language? How about container? What's your attachment template? See, I don't know how to ask any of those things. They're intelligent. I just don't know what intelligence love looks like because my teachers are not teaching those things. They're calling that blind spot love. Now, it's far more dangerous to have a blind spot and call it love than have a blind spot and call it nothing, because we all know love is a good thing. So if you mingle the blind spot with love, you've created a toxic bomb that you cannot differentiate between love until it explodes, and you know it feels bad, but you don't know what to do the next time around. High is completely incompetent at addressing and differentiating that bomb of a repeated traumatic pattern from sex. As a result, a large percentage of high participants are regularly traumatized, chalk it all up to, oh, well, that's love, and do it again. And there's a tremendous amount of dissipation in the community, you know, where People go into shame. People leave for weeks and months. People blame themselves for not being loving enough. And the facilitators just leave people to stew in the ignorance that reflects their own. And that's incredibly sad. And it's not, unfortunately, because the facilitators do not stick up for the participants in those situations. All of the team members at High who have written to me and said, yeah, you're right, this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. They have all written after they left, and not one of them shared their truth with the group. Now, that could be because High disconnects emails, right? Because as soon as I told the facilitators that I would tell the community about the sexual abuse of one of their facilitators, my emails got disconnected. So it could be the former High team members intuitively know that the Human Awareness Institute is actually the Human Secrecy Institute in disguise. And if they start telling certain truths, they'll have their email accounts and they'll feel even worse than they do now, and nobody will know anyway. But I got around that by sending direct emails to people. However, an ignorant school raises ignorant students. And so one of the saddest testimonies of ignorance, whether it's from Anne or her colleagues or her teacher, Stan Dale, is that while being sexually abused by a High facilitator and while having that covered up and while having my emails blocked, there was no community member at High, no team member, who was willing to put the needs of the sexual abuse survivor first. There were team members that would say things behind closed doors, but they didn't want their names used because they were afraid of being punished by the teachers of love and intimacy and sex, right? So a lot of sticky stuff going on there. So what do I make of this? Anne trained my sexual abuser, recommended him repeatedly without caveat, and pressured me to keep his sexual abuse secret, which weaponizes him in the face of her students and participants. Because if you're a school and you know that one of the teachers is sexually abusing the students, and you cover it up, because Anne was worried about High's reputation. She wasn't worried about my well-being. She was worried about the symbol. Now, this is a deep confusion. It's a common confusion in institutions all around the world, including the government. You'll have people trying to protect the president's reputation while breaking U.S. law. There's the idea that the image, the president, is more important than the laws or the public knowing the truth, for example. So Watergate, you name it. And so Anne would be on the side of covering up Nixon because it would ruin the reputation of the presidency. Her baby, the Human Awareness Institute, would be damaged if it came out that her student, Peter Sandhill, a fellow teacher, sexually abused a participant, myself. And so that's obviously nothing to respect or admire. It's tremendously sad, particularly because it's not clear that Anne understands that when you protect the symbol, which is a derivative, while destroying the underlying asset, which is what the derivative is based on, you've made the wrong choice. It's called worshiping the golden calf or worshiping a false god. It's when the reputation, the text, the logo, is valued more than the underlying asset, which is trustworthiness and competency and legality. Trustworthiness, competency, legality were all violated. But Anne sold trustworthiness to protect the symbol, the reputation, not even of her client, of the Human Awareness Institute, without even grasping how absurd it is. Anne participated in a lawsuit against me brought by the Human Awareness Institute to try and sue me to shut down my website, which I had to create because she wasn't doing her job to write to all the community and say, this is what's gone on, here's how you need to protect yourself. So Anne told me in private, that man is dangerous. Then she went and taught a workshop with him and recommended him to new innocent students. And when I said we need to tell people, Anne said, why? Why do you need to tell people? It's not good for you and it's not good for Peter and it's damaging my baby. Hi. The Human Awareness Institute, a symbol, becomes more important than underlying trustworthiness. Now, Anne has never apologized for training my sexual abuser, for recommending him, for asking me to pay her money to mediate with him, for not going public herself, for not teaching trauma and PTSD in her sessions and taking money for stuff she couldn't help with. Anne has not apologized. She hasn't whistleblown to protect her students and protect her therapeutic patients. Anne did not reveal that Peter Sandhill was an unlicensed therapist that she was recommending without caveat. She didn't reveal that she is an unlicensed therapist that she's recommending without caveat. Anne's fear in these conflicts of interest is louder than her courage to do the right thing. Anne's fear is stronger than her courage to do the right thing. Anne is not competent enough to understand that she is killing the underlying asset while protecting the derivative, which means the derivative has no value. It's a lie, it's a scam. You always protect the underlying asset of trustworthiness by being transparent, by owning and being committed to responding, by asking, what do you need? How can I help? Anne excluded me from all the meetings and went along as a shill in fear for her buddies who didn't know anything any more than she did, other than let's protect our reputation and our money, rather than protect the client and our mission statement. Because if you're committed to a world where everyone wins, you are not committed to secrecy, sexual abuse, shaming your client, and taking away the choice. See, because when you hide information, which is one of Anne's bigger crimes or, faux pas in this saga, when you hide information, you take away people's choice. Now, I could just have sex with you without a condom, and I could hide the information that I have genital herpes. Now, if you get genital herpes because I thought maybe you would ask me to use a condom if you knew, how do you feel? You feel warm and fuzzy inside, like this is the kind of person who's really looking out for my well-being? Or do you say, he knew he had herpes. He knew it's a lifetime disease. My sexual life is down for the rest of my life. And he did that so that he wouldn't have to wear a condom. Okay, so where does that leave a trusting, loving relationship? Knowing that that's the value hierarchy, a little bit of pleasure and killing off the trustworthiness of the relationship. You see, Anne made that trade-off, not to tell people that she was recommending an illegal, lying, cheating, betraying sexual abuser of a therapeutic patient. And she'd rather cover that up so that other people don't have the opportunity to make an informed choice out of fear that her organization would suffer a short-term hit. Well, that's not something I can respect or recommend, because Anne loses by killing off the underlying asset in the organization she's pretending is more important than her patient. When a service nonprofit is only as important as its value to the client, to the public. You don't deserve to exist if you are systematically taking money to harm people. You don't deserve to exist. The basis of a public nonprofit and an educational institute is that you benefit people. So if you will sacrifice your students to preserve the organization rather than sacrifice the organization to preserve your students, your organization has no value. That's what Anne did to High. She would not fight for the underlying asset of trustworthiness. She also showed tremendous distrust in all of her students and peers. If I was Anne, I would have publicly written about what happened and asked for support for her client, her patient, and to see it through and to help the organization grow, that this was a time of growth and healing. But everyone needed to know what was going on, and here's the help that was needed for Dane, her client, and here's the help that High needed. And this is the kind of organization we believe in. That's an Anne that I can be proud of, because that's an Anne committed to everyone winning. That's an Anne committed to growth and the underlying asset, right? I would have loved to have seen that Anne at my biggest hour of need. I saw the Anne telling me not to tell the truth and putting other sexual abuse survivors at risk to protect Anne's fear at the expense of her mission. And so I'd say 3 out of 10. It's so easy to be a lot worse than what Anne is and does and has done. She has not apologized to me for any of this, which means she isn't owning it. And as someone in fear, not owning one's impact in these areas while doing so much damage, it makes it hard to believe that there can be a change, right? How can you change if you're in denial? How can you change if your fear is bigger than your ethics? If your ignorance is bigger than your knowledge? That's the crisis that we're in as a culture, as parents, as therapists, as facilitators, as leaders of nonprofits, as politicians. We're all in this crisis. And, Anne is way better than most. I'll give her that. But when you're going through profound dissociative trauma, financially, emotionally, psychologically, in a suicidal state, the faults of your primary connection are amplified many times. And so while Anne is better than most, she has still hurt me more than anyone else other than her colleagues as an adult who trusted her to know the difference between love and hostility, between love and ignorance and fear, and was betrayed and is betrayed in that trust.